Welcome to Tartan Talk with USA Kilts. Today, we sit down with my good friend Shaun from Shaun in America.
Great to be here.
Shaun, thank you for coming out today. I know you've traveled a long way to be here. So for those of our viewers who haven't seen you before, give me your 30-second origin story, comic book number one.
Sure thing. Well, first of all, great to be here. Thank you for inviting us out here. My name is Shaun, like you said. I am from Edinburgh in Scotland, Scotland's capital city. And yeah, I guess ever since from a really young age, I've been telling stories, either as a journalist, writing stories, and then eventually evolving that into video making. So today I have a YouTube channel in which I talk a lot about my travels, and that kind of morphed really specifically into travels around the United States. And that started in 2017 when I was invited by the United States Embassy to London on a kind of like an exchange mission, where they took a bunch of us out here and showed us a lot of things that we weren't kind of used to. And I kind of really got interested from that trip and have expanded since then, and I've traveled to a lot of different places, which has been great fun. So yeah, I guess my content on YouTube now is focused on traveling around the United States and meeting a lot of different people like yourself.
Right. What was the aha moment for you that started the vlogging career?
Yeah, I guess so. Probably back in 2014. My wife's from Brazil, and we were actually out visiting her family, and we were staying there for an extended period of time. I think it was like 4 months or something. And I guess, you know, I was writing as a freelance journalist at the time, so I used to write. And I realized back then, you know, it wasn't early days of video on the internet, but it was certainly much earlier than it is now, right? And I did know that a lot of people were telling really good stories through video on YouTube. And I started watching a couple of YouTubers that I really enjoyed. And I kind of figured that actually I could transform the way I tell stories into this kind of video format. And because I was out in Brazil, which is a really kind of different place for a lot of people in the UK, I thought, right, let's tell the story about why I'm there and what I'm doing and all the different things that I find out. So that was a kind of the spark, if you like, telling the story of what I was doing in Brazil, how it's different to the place that I come from.
Right. Was there a reception to it that kind of like clicked, like, oh, people like hearing this kind of stuff, or how did that work?
It took a long time to build, to be honest, but eventually there was a group of people that kind of tuned into it and thought, yeah, this is good fun. It's good to see other people's perspectives on a different place. And actually quite a lot of Brazilian people tuned in because they enjoyed seeing a person kind of exploring their country as well, which it kind of feeds into what I'm doing now, right? Yeah. I think a lot of people from here in the States, and that's largely where the people who watch my videos are from, enjoy the fact that I'm visiting their state or I'm visiting their town.
Right. Neat. So tell me about your why. Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, so I guess there's probably 2 or 3 reasons to that. I've always enjoyed telling stories, like I said, from a very early age as a journalist when I started out in my career, if you like. It's something I've always liked to do, tell stories and find interesting things and take that out to a kind of audience. And that kind of transforms into different forms and for different mediums, right? It's something I've always been passionate about, is telling stories.
Nice.
I think that's a very Scottish thing. We've always had good Scottish storytellers, even, you know, way back to like Robbie Burns, for example. He's basically a storyteller. We've just kind of evolved the formats in which we do that. And so that's the main thing. Second of all, I love meeting people and learning about new cultures and learning about new things. And so this really brings that together for me.
So what's the big picture for you? What's the big picture for the channel? Where do you want to take it?
Yeah, so I think over the last probably 2 or 3 years, certainly I think since 2017, but I would say even more so in the last few years, really focusing it on this connection between me being a Scottish person, coming here and meeting people who might relate to Scotland in some ways. And there's a lot of people here, as you well know, who have that feeling, right? You know, either through ancestry or through falling in love with Scotland through shows like Outlander. And so you're meeting those people who have actually, a lot of them come to Scotland and visit. Coming here and learning more about them and their life has been really fascinating for me. So really focusing in on that and also doing a bit of fun travel and, you know, experiencing different things here that might be quite unique for me, like foods and you know, the types of places that you might go shopping, basic things, for example, really focusing on all those differences. And so for now, certainly for the near future, that's where I see myself focusing on.
Right on. What does your family think of what you do?
Yeah, I guess that they have always been quite supportive. You know, back in the early days when I started writing as a journalist, for example, they always thought it was kind of weird that I fell into that because I never went to university or college and studied that. It was just something I did naturally and really enjoyed. And so they thought it was quite cool that I had this kind of inclination, you could say. And so for me to evolve that into YouTube, you know, I guess there was probably a lot of skepticism to say, oh, that's never going to work, or, you know. But I've always managed to kind of find my way and, you know, make actually, one of the things I would say is it's almost like making a hobby pay. or making a hobby pay for itself.
Yeah, yeah.
Like my hobby is traveling and meeting people, and all these things are really expensive. And if you can do something actually doing YouTube, it helps cover the cost of that as well as the fact you're telling stories to hundreds of thousands of people sometimes. I think putting all those things together, people were quite supportive in the end.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you some travel-related questions.
Yeah.
So, out of all the places you've been in the U.S., why is Philadelphia your favorite? No, what's your favorite place you've been in the U.S. so far?
That's a really tough one. I've got two favorite places, and they're very different from each other, right? I would say, first of all, I've always had a soft spot for New York City. I love the place. I think it's amazing. The energy there is unlike anywhere I've ever been in the world. Mm-hmm. But that's very much big city talking, right? I like both big cities and I like rural parts equally, right? And so and it's also a city as well, right? So New Orleans, I would say, is probably my second favorite. I think the culture there is just so unique and different. The food is incredible. And the history of the place is really interesting as well. So I'd say definitely those two places I've really, really enjoyed visiting. In New York, I've been back time and time again, just because, like I said, I really love the place. And I think when we were in New Orleans, I kind of saw a side to the States that I'd never experienced anywhere else before. Like I said, it's very unique.
Yeah, yeah. It's a different culture in and of itself.
Yeah.
So give me a bit about your process in getting ready to travel. How do you decide where you're going to go, and how do you plan out the trip?
So sometimes it can be really last minute and sporadic. Like I've literally been to places before where 2 or 3 days before I hadn't planned to travel anywhere, and then some kind of deal came up. And I was like,
right.
Oh, that could be interesting. So I'm quite a spontaneous person that way. But otherwise, in terms of some of the other trips I've done here in the States, for example, it might have been for a specific event. So I went to North Carolina because there was an event all around Outlander there, and people had invited me, like a year before.
No, nice.
And that's something I always wanted to do. And so there's been a number of those type of things. And then there's a bit kind of bucket list places that I've always wanted to do, right? So I think one of them was to do the West Coast, drive all the way down, and we drove from Seattle all the way down to Los Angeles. And that's something that's always kind of been like a dream experience that I wanted to do, right? And I think that's probably a major motivation, is ticking off those bucket lists. And there's quite a lot more to go.
There are 50 states.
Yes.
So what's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to you while you've been on one of your treks?
Yeah, I've had some really, really great, unique experiences. I think everything from the fact that we have been out traveling places and someone's recognized us, in really obscure places like you would never imagine. And that's always good. I really love meeting people who watch my show. I think more recently, something that happened that was cool. We were traveling through Houston Airport, and one of the guys who's on the immigration service, who kind of stamps your passport as you're going in and out, right. He recognized me. He was very straight-faced. He stamped my passport and he was like, "Hey, I watch your videos," and that was it. And I was just like, wow, of all the places. But we've had that, in a number of different places. It's always really, really special and unique when I get to meet people like that from different backgrounds, and they come up and say hello. I think in general, whenever I'm in a place and I've kind of done like a meet and greet, I've put it out there to the internet that I'm going to do a meet and greet on a certain time and place, and then dozens of people show up. That's always really special for me.
Yeah. So if money were no object, where would you want to live in the entire world? What kind of house would you want to live in?
That is a tough question, because there's lots of places I've been and think I would like to live here. Basically everywhere I go, I think I could live here.
Yeah.
I guess two different types of places. One of that would be like a big house on a beach, somewhere with a beach. I think a few months ago we were in Florida in the Keys. I was like, I could live here.
Yeah.
I could definitely have a big house here on the beach and have a boat and go fishing all the time or whatever. That definitely appeals to me. And then again, because I said, I love New York City, if I could have a really great apartment in Manhattan, that would be awesome. I might not want to live there forever, but to experience that, living there for 2 or 3 years, I think that would be really, really awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember the first time that you were somebody recognized you and was like, "Oh, hey, are you that guy from YouTube?" What was that like the first time it happened? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I probably don't remember the very first time it happened, but definitely in the first kind of year when it started happening. I actually think we were in Brazil and we were at a concert. It would have been Arcade Fire, the band from Canada, in Brazil, and we were kind of getting our tickets to go in, and somebody recognized me there, and I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And that's when I realized, actually, when you put videos on the internet, and it might be 10 people, it might be 100 people watching, those are all people. And it reaches a greater distance than you could imagine. There's people from all around the world watching, right? And when that happened, it just made me feel like, this is worth it. I should keep going. I can obviously have a good connection with people, and I really enjoy that. and it doesn't matter the fact that you don't always get to see them face to face. They're out there, and you all get to meet them, and it made me feel great. And I thought it was a bit more inspiration and motivation to keep going.
Right on. Now you fancy yourself a little bit of a foodie. What is the weirdest, most obscure food you've had in America?
In America, I had, and I didn't like it. I had sea urchin, raw sea urchin, from a fish market. I can't remember exactly where it was, but I did not enjoy it. It wasn't good.
I wouldn't like it either.
It was like bitter. I don't know. Yeah, not good. It's like eating brains.
Have you had brains?
No, but I can imagine that's what eating brains would be like.
So Hannibal Lecter,
Yeah.
my next question. So what did you think of the cheesesteak as a regional food?
Yeah, I think they're fantastic. You know, how can you go wrong with good steak, good meat, on a bit of good bread and cheese, right? What I find really fascinating is how different they are, because I've had 4 or 5 different ones now since arriving, which is probably not a good thing, right? We're going to have to go on a diet when we go back, right? But they're all so different from each other, and they're all the basic same 3 ingredients. And how do you make those things be so different?
Yeah, it's kind of like pizza. You can have very, very varying degrees of ingredients in pizza as well.
Definitely.
It's basically just cheese, sauce, and bread. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was really good. I enjoyed it, and we've still got more time, so there's probably time to fit another one in.
Yeah, Delisandro's. That's the last one you got to hit on the way back.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be the crowning jewel of the cheesesteak glory.
We'll put them all together in a kind of review, and we'll let you know a ranking.
Fair. Oh, you should have. There's another Philly thing on South Street now. Jim's is one cheesesteak place we're going to go to. Yeah. It burned down, but a very, very Philly thing is they have the Philly taco, which is you get this oversized slice of pizza, and then you put a cheesesteak in it and you eat it together.
Wow.
Yes.
I mean, that sounds very Scottish. That's something we would do. But that's amazing. I would love that.
So you've been wearing your kilt for this entire trip. How have the reactions been? Anything that surprised you or not surprised you?
Yeah, I guess I've worn a kilt in a few different places in the States. New York was one, and got a few reactions there that time. This trip, it's been a little bit quieter, to be honest. I've had a couple of reactions from people in DC when we were there the other day.
A couple at the Flyers game last night.
A couple at the Flyers game as well, and people are very positive about it, generally speaking. I think sometimes people don't know what it is and what it's about, but mostly, certainly those who know about Scottish culture and the kilts, they're very positive and they want to know more. They want to stop you and have a conversation and learn about it, and learn about where you're from and all the rest of it. And I think that's really cool. It's a good conversation starter. It's a good way to spread your kind of own culture and history and all the rest of it. And it's kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm from Scotland, I'm here, and like, come and say hi. And that's cool. Like I said, I love meeting people, and that's a good way in.
Yeah, there's the old phrase, the kilts are worn by Scots in America and Americans in Scotland.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So
in interacting with Americans, what are some of the things that they ask you as soon as they hear that accent?
Yeah.
Do they jump like, oh, you're Scottish? What's the next thing out of their mouth? Do they ask you questions? Do they want to tell you stories?
Yeah, I guess going back from that, there's 2 things that happen. Either people say I'm Scottish and they know exactly where I'm from, or they think I'm Australian. There's no in between. There's no in between. It's either Australian or Scottish. But the ones who know I'm from Scotland, they're really, usually they can tell me a story of their own. Like either they've been there, or they have some kind of family ancestry, which is great. And then they'll say, like I said, usually, oh, I was there back in 2010 or something like that, and I had a great time in Edinburgh and the Highlands. And that's always really good to hear. I love the fact that people come over to Scotland, which is a really small country, probably smaller than the state of Philadelphia.
In the city. State of Pennsylvania.
Probably smaller than the state of Pennsylvania. And for me, knowing that people, have traveled around the world, hundreds of thousands of miles, thousands of miles sometimes, to come and visit Scotland, it really makes me, it feels good. And I want to make sure everyone who's done that's had a good time. So to hear that from people, that they have had a good time, they've enjoyed it, and they want to come back is special. But yeah, definitely people will say to me, oh, you're from Scotland. I have either been there, I watch Outlander, or my family's from there.
Nice. What are some of the, now speaking of tourism, I'm going to flip it on its head. Yeah. When tourists go to Scotland, whether Americans, Canadians, Germans, whatever, what is your personal bugaboo? What's the thing that you're just like, oh, I hate when people do that when they go over there?
I'm quite an easygoing person with this.
Okay.
I know there's a lot of Scottish people who might sometimes see it differently, but I generally feel as long as people are not causing any kind of trouble, they're not making a mess, they're not disturbing any of the locals or whatever, I generally feel it's a place where you can come and do what you want and be who you want to be. Scotland's quite an open and friendly place. And generally speaking, you can come here and have fun. You can wear a kilt, or you can not, whatever you fancy. And it's a place where I am proud of the fact that people can come and be who they are and have fun and not really follow the rules all the time, because, you know, life's too boring to follow rules all the time. Like I said, as long as nobody's getting hurt and nobody's upsetting anyone, I'm very easygoing in that way. And you know, I've had heated discussions with actual Scottish people before about this, when someone will say, "Oh, I hate when people come here and do this or that," and I'm like, "Well, listen, they're just on holiday. They want to enjoy themselves. They're not necessarily trying to cause offence or anything. They're just here to explore and have fun." And the same way that I'm here, and I would like to think people would give me the benefit of the doubt when I get things wrong, and I do all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have that same thing where it's, I try to be, you know, a good ambassador of America when I'm in Scotland, and kind to visitors when they're here in America as well. That's one commonality I think that many countries, not just Scotland and America, have across the world.
Definitely. And I will say as well, as a Scottish person here, one of my favourite things is how, even if I'm not talking about the kilts or Scottishness or whatever, people are just always so positive and warm and friendly towards me, and that's one of the things that's really got me coming back every time.
Right. So, what is your secret? You know, you don't tell anyone, but we're going to tell everybody out there. What is your favorite place that all Americans who go to Scotland must see, non-touristy?
Non-touristy, that is a really tough question, because, like I said, Scotland's a very small place. And I almost feel like there is hardly an inch of the place that hasn't been explored by tourists. Like I said, you can drive from the border in the south with England to the very far north in about 4 hours, right? Maybe 5. It's a small country. A place that I went a few years ago with my wife, and we both thought, wow, this is really cool and different, was the Orkney Islands. Now, I think people, when they come to Scotland, might not always spend the time in going to there. No, they get a lot of tourists up there as well, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people won't go there just because it's out of the way and you need to get a ferry to get there. But what's really different about the Orkney Islands is they've got a really unique kind of Viking history. And so it makes it slightly different from the rest of Scotland in that sense. And to learn about that and to go there was really, really special. I loved it there, and I would recommend everyone to go and visit.
Nice.
But in terms of a place where tourists don't go, somewhere that locals would know and tourists don't, I don't think that exists anymore. Scotland's just too small. And if I had one tip, actually, this might be a bit left field. Glasgow is not the pretty city of Scotland. Right? Edinburgh, where I'm from, is a good-looking city with lots of history, and people love to come to Edinburgh because of that. But actually, and this is something a lot of people from Edinburgh don't like to admit, Glasgow is a place where everything happens in Scotland. It's got a lot of culture, underground culture, and if you're someone who likes nightlife, or if you like music, live music, Glasgow's a place to go. That's where you'll get actually, as well as like rock and roll, you'll also find Highland culture as well, and Highland music. It's got a great live music scene, and you can go to any pub, apart from probably some of the football ones, but you can almost go into any other pub and have a great night. And Glaswegians will say, a funeral in Glasgow is more fun than a wedding in Edinburgh. And it's actually true.
I kind of absolutely love that.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely, if you want to come to Scotland and get a real Scottish experience in a city, Glasgow's the place to be.
Nice. What do you think of Inverness then? It's as a much smaller city in Glasgow.
Yeah, Inverness, I've been there a few times and stayed there. Like you said, it's a lot smaller and much more kind of country feel. Inverness is a good place to base yourself to explore some of the local attractions there, because you've got like the Standing Stones on one side, you've got the Culloden Battlefield, and then you're only 1 hour from some amazing scenery spots as well, whether you go north or whether you go south to the Aviemore area. You can also explore some of the whiskey on the Speyside as well, really, really close by. And then also the Balmoral Estates, which is where the Queen and the royal family stay as well. People love to go there. And so Inverness is good for that. As a city, there's not a whole lot going on just because it's small, but it's a good place to base yourself.
All right. Now I'm going to ask you some questions, like kind of Scots versus Americans type questions. What do you think is the biggest misconception that Americans have about Scots?
I guess that we're all interested and involved in the kind of clan culture, Highland culture, which is a really kind of nuanced thing and difficult to explain. But I think a lot of people in Scotland, because we live in the cities mostly nowadays, right? There's 5.5 million people in Scotland, and most of us live in Glasgow and Edinburgh in the Central Belt. And we're not really connected to that Highland culture. This is something I talk about quite a lot when I'm here. That Highland culture still exists around the edges, but not as it used to. And actually a lot of that culture moved away from Scotland and left and came to North America, right? It went to Canada, it came here to the States. And so I think a lot of people come to Scotland expecting to see a lot of that, and they might be surprised with the fact that you won't see as many kilts, for example, as you might imagine you would see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the biggest thing that I was kind of, that I've noticed that people think is like, they just assume that you go to Scotland, you're going to see kilts everywhere. It's
Absolutely.
like, you might see, a few, buskers on the road, or you might see a couple in a tourist hat shop or something like that, but you're not going to see many while you're there.
Yeah, and also like to add to that, building out from that story, I think, I get a lot of people from the States coming to me and, especially on YouTube and other places commenting, and they'll write to me in Gaelic. And apart from Slanjava, I couldn't understand another word, like not one word more of that language.
Right.
This language is very particular to parts of Scotland, and in fact, only very isolated communities actually speak it nowadays, and it's usually the older generations, which unfortunately are dying out right now. Now there is a movement to bring it back, and some schools are teaching it, but I would be willing to bet that 99% of the Scottish population that you would interact with in places like Edinburgh and Glasgow are not going to know a single word of Gaelic apart from Slanjava. And I'd also be willing to bet more people in the States, far more people, speak it here than do in Scotland as well. So a lot of people will write to me in emails and in comments in Gaelic, and I'm like, sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
Google Translate.
Yeah.
Copy, paste, sorted.
Sorted.
Exactly. Now, are the signs in? I remember traveling up to Inverness, and I remember signs being in Gaelic as well as in English. Yeah. Is that just a Highland thing, or is that all over? I forget.
It's all over now. This is actually quite a recent thing. The government spent a bit of money and made sure that the language, they don't want the language to die, right? Now, ultimately, it's up to people like myself and other young people in Scotland to make it not die, make sure it carries on. And the government have tried to encourage that by, making sure all the signs are in Gaelic as well. But they can't really do so much more. I mean, it's in schools and all the rest of it. But ultimately, there is a movement of younger people who are trying to learn, like through apps like Duolingo, for example. But you will see signs, and even like police vans, for example, they'll have the Gaelic version, and ambulances, and it's basically the same word. Yeah. But you will find it in all these places, but it's not because everyone speaks the language, it's because the government is trying to make an effort to show that they care.
Right.
Which is a good thing. I think that's a great thing. But ultimately, they can only take that so far. The rest is up to
the individuals.
Individuals and younger people especially, to actually think, I want to learn that language and I want to make it survive.
So what are some of the biggest differences that you've noticed? There's a lot of similarities, obviously. What are some of the biggest differences you've noticed between Scots and Americans?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, we could get in really deep detail about this, and we could speak about it for hours. And we've even had like pub conversations about this, right? Yeah. There's lots of things from government, politics, and kind of conceptions of freedom, and how you see it against how we see it. I think there are differences there, and actually that's one of the reasons the United States Embassy put me on that program, is because they wanted to show British people some of the things that are different about culture, about government, about all that kind of stuff. And so there is a lot of differences there. There are, right, cultural differences, even down to basic stuff like tipping. That's something that's very, very uniquely American. Like there's very few other places I've went around the world where that is part of the culture. And I think those things, people, when they come to the States for the first time, they'll notice it. But ultimately, that is totally like a sideline to the similarities and how people from here are generally very positive and warm and friendly. I think once that side comes through, and once you get to speak to people, you kind of forget about all those other things, right? Mm-hmm. Because yes, there's differences. There's differences in terms of political stuff, but when you get to speak to people one-on-one, you realize there's a lot more similarities, and people here are just warm and friendly, and you can have a conversation with just about anyone about anything, and that's what I love.
Yeah, our conversation yesterday, talking about if you turn off the news and actually start interacting with people that you have a little bit of difference with, as long as they're not, hyper focused on news as well, you find a lot more commonality than you do differences, and it's Absolutely. Not as bad as people always think it is.
Absolutely, it's not really as bad. And actually, almost every time that I've come here, this is kind of crazy, me saying this right now, I'm just thinking it out loud. Every time I've come here, you probably, there's been something on the news about, something bad that's happened, right? Any number of things you can imagine. And so for the week or two before I come here, I start feeling a little bit nervous about it. And also people will comment from the States about, do you feel safe about this? And it starts to build up. The minute I arrive here, that goes away. The minute I arrive here and start speaking to people, it goes away.
Yeah, I noticed that. Some of the comments on on the Washington, D.C. live, like, oh, you got to be careful down there. You shouldn't be there after dark. And then you're going to Philly. Oh, don't go to Philly. It's very violent. And it was like, really?
I don't find it any more dangerous in any of these big cities here than anywhere else. A lot of people, whichever city I've been to in America, whether it's been on the West Coast in Los Angeles, whether it's been New York, whether it's been Texas, I've had people comment on that exact same thing. And it's never as bad. And I think it's often people who might live here who have never been to these places.
Yes, or do you think it's people who just are averse to city versus country living?
Possibly. And I think it also works the other way around as well. Whenever I've been in the country, people will have misconceptions about that as well.
Right.
Probably a lot of that, I would imagine. But ultimately, I think because of that, because you're exposed to the news, you're exposed to the comments all the time, you do get nervous about coming here. Right? That's a fact, and it's kind of sad, but that's a fact. But as soon as you arrive here, that goes away because it's not reality. That's what I've learned. That's one of the biggest things I've learned about here is, despite all the things you see going on, all the news, and you can get into all the detail about that, but it's not as bad on the ground as it seems from outside or from someone who just watches social media or the news.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much every country as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So you've been exposed through going to some of the Highland Games and things like that, and through being here in our building.
Yeah.
You've been exposed to some Americans wearing kilts, and you've obviously been exposed to Scottish people wearing kilts. What are some of the differences that you've noticed or similarities? Because we're always focused on the way that it's traditionally done, or how it's usually done, and it's not always the case, I've been noticing.
Yeah.
So what are some of the similarities and differences with the way that Americans wear kilts and express their heritage versus the way Scots do it?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and I think it's something that can be explored through multiple videos. This is something I'm going to try and bring out in my videos, but I think ultimately, now, I can't speak for everyone in Scotland because there will definitely be Scottish people who do not agree with me, 100%. Scottish people are actually famous for disagreeing with each other throughout history, right?
You ever hear sorry, I remember interrupting. If you put two Scots in a room and you get three opinions,
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I can't speak for everyone, but I know based on my experience of growing up in Scotland and all my friends and family, I consider that to be, quite a wide circle of all the people I've met in Scotland, is that certainly with like kilts and tartans and stuff, we don't take it too seriously. By that I mean we're proud of it and we think it's great and it's a symbol of Scotland, but we don't take it seriously like there are rules that you need to follow. Like, for example, I think there's far less people in Scotland who would really identify with their family tartan. Now, there definitely are people who will get married and they will seek out their family tartan unless they think it looks rubbish, which sometimes is the case, right? There's a lot, I think, generally speaking, people in Scotland, if they don't have that kind of connection with clans and all that, will tend to choose tartan based on something they like. It has to look good, right? But it's far less about that kind of connection between families and clans and all the rest of it. And certainly with young people, even if they have a name which you could identify with a clan, I don't know, McDonald or something, for example. And that is one of the big differences I feel with people in Scotland, is that we are far more loose with that stuff. Here in the States, people take it very seriously in terms of, I belong to this family, and I am in this clan, and I need to wear this tartan. And like, people here are very regimented in that fact. And that's great as well. I think that's really cool that they can honour that kind of family tradition that's passed on through the centuries, right? People could probably have the same piece of cloth that they might have had for hundreds of years. That's amazing. But it's just not always the case in Scotland, certainly in my experience. And we tend to only wear kilts for very special occasions as well. Either for if we're going to some kind of international event or some kind of big fancy thing where it would be appropriate, or for weddings. So casual kilt wearing is quite rare, I would say. That's a difference as well. Whereas I think here in the States, people can wear it casually to anything. I mean, we will wear it for like a rugby game, for example.
Yeah.
If you go to rugby, you'll see people wearing kilts. Don't get me wrong. But I think here people will wear it more and they'll be very connected with how it has always been done and how it should be done. And I think one thing I want to get across with that is neither way is wrong. It's just different. And it's how the culture's evolved throughout the years, I guess.
Yeah, it's the one thing I've noticed is Americans, I think, they want so badly to not screw it up or to do it the right way or to pay homage to their heritage, that they are concerned, not too concerned, that they are concerned about doing something wrong. Whereas in Scotland, you've grown up with it. It's just part of the background. It's part of the scenery. You're in it.
Yeah.
So it's always been there.
Yeah, exactly. It's always been in the background for us, and so it's almost like we can't mess it up because we're Scottish, right? And I guess you're probably right. There's people here who think, I need to make sure it's right. But, and again, I can't speak for everyone, but when someone comes to Scotland and they're wearing a kilt, I feel proud of the fact if they're not from Scotland, they have that interest or they have that culture that they want to preserve it. And I wouldn't give, even the smallest minute of thinking of the fact that it wasn't perfectly right in any way. It's just not something that comes into my mind. Just the fact that they're interested in it is good enough for me. You will see people who will buy a towel in this form of a kilt, and they'll go to Edinburgh and they'll wrap it around themselves, and they'll go to the bars in Edinburgh. That's a different story.
That's just playing with it.
That's just messing around. That's like, and they'll have the Jimmy hats on and all the rest of it. But even those guys, they don't get any stick. Like, people realise they're just out for fun. But if people want to come to Scotland wearing a kilt, I think it's fantastic. It shows us that people care, and I love it. Like, I have to stress this, I don't speak for everyone in Scotland, but my experience of people who I know since growing up has always been the case that we take pride in the fact that people are interested. But yeah, definitely the differences are, I think, like you said, people here want to make sure they do it the right way, or they follow their family tradition. What I'd like to say to a lot of people who might have thought about wearing a kilt but might be worried because maybe they can't necessarily trace their family is there's so many beautiful tartans out there. I'm wearing the American Dream one, which I think is awesome. It's not connected to family, but it's still amazing, and it's got an amazing story behind it. And so there's opportunities for everyone who wants to get involved.
Yeah. So thank you. Very kind of you to say. So when you /family/friends are going to wear the kilt for the first time in Scotland, how do you learn what the nuances are? How do you know what to do?
So yeah, I guess my first memory of wearing a kilt would have been in primary school. The school system in Scotland is a little bit different from here. So primary school is like the kind of first school that you'll go into from ages like, I think 5 or 6 up until 12 or 13.
Okay.
So at the end of that period, you'll have like I can't remember if they call it like a dance or like a, end of school prom type of thing, right? And you'll tend to have a ceilidh during that event. And throughout the years before, they'll show you the ceilidh dances so you learn how to do it. And then usually you'll be expected to wear a kilt at that event. So if you haven't been to a wedding before that, like a family member's wedding before that age, then that will be the first experience of wearing a kilt. And usually it's up to you to go to like a kilt shop and discover how to do it. And that tends to be where it is. So yeah, I'd say the first 2 ways of a Scottish person wearing a kilt is either in that event and their family will take them to a kilt hire shop.
Yeah.
Right? Or if it's younger than that, they've been to a wedding, they'll also go to a kilt hire shop. I think it's more rare for a kid, especially because they'll grow out of it, to have their own kilt bought for them. It's very rare.
So essentially, you're saying that I'm putting words in your mouth. You believe that the hire shops are essentially driving the traditional Highland wear, so to speak, and showing people how to do it. So, how good or bad are they at explaining that to people, do you think?
I think there's probably good and bad ones. The ones I went to were probably pretty bad. I think it was basically like they didn't teach anything. It was just like, put it on you, this is it, like you're done.
Right.
They didn't want to waste time, so like they just shoved it on, so this is how you do it, and it's over and done. I think that's probably the way that they do it. So I don't think I had great experiences at hire shops, but they are certainly the much more popular way of Scottish people to get a kilt because, like I said, people usually only buy them for a one-off special event, right?
Right.
And so people tend to prefer to do it that way. And also because if we have a wedding in Scotland, I'm not sure if people here are aware of this, but if you have a wedding in Scotland and the groom is wearing a tartan, for whatever reason, it could be family or it could be they just like it, it tends to be all the groomsmen will also wear the same tartan. So everybody looks the same up on the altar, right? For photogenic reasons. But all those people, they'll have to go and rent that, hire that kilt. And so the hire businesses do quite well because they have a almost unlimited supply of weddings to do every year. And that tends to be the first experience of people wearing a kilt.
Now, for your wedding, did you wear a kilt?
I did, yes.
And did you hire it or did you purchase it?
I bought it just for sentimental reasons. So I still have that one. It doesn't fit me anymore, not by a long shot. I've put on probably...
They shrink in the closet.
Yeah, they shrink in the closet.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
It, yeah. But it wasn't a particularly special kilt or anything. It wasn't like a particularly well made or even an expensive one. It was just one that I liked the tartan. It looked nice.
Right.
And it wasn't anything to do with my family. I think it might have been like a Lindsay or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But it wasn't any connection to me. I just liked the look of it. And that's probably, like I said, that's probably the way that most Scottish people go about their kilt decisions. And the only reason I bought it rather than renting it is because sentimental reasons. You know, I got married in it, and yeah.
That makes sense. So how does it feel as a Scot, and I know you're not speaking for all Scots, more for yourself, but what do you think the broader sense is of countries and people out with Scotland, so, you know, the diaspora, so it's Australia, Germany, America, Canada. How do you think Scots feel about people outside of Scotland wearing the kilt?
Yeah. So I would like to think most people are very accepting and very humbled by that. Like I feel really great towards people who are wearing a kilt. But I know, just based on the fact that I've heard comments before from people I know, and from comments you see on the internet, that people are quite sometimes disparaging and a bit.
There's internet trolls? Tell me more.
Yeah,
no.
They exist. So you do see comments that are probably less than kind about people wearing a kilt from around the world, and that's really unfortunate because I do not feel that way. I would like to think the majority of people do not feel that way, and I'd also like to think the people who make any kind of negative comments do not own a kilt themselves, and so they don't understand that culture.
Yeah,
and they're not a part of it. And so for them to make those comments, I feel is a form of being unsure about their own identity sometimes, or maybe even the fact that they could be not really understanding about the historical significance of Scotland and where people went, right? Because like you said, people went everywhere. People went to Canada. People went to the States before it was the United States. People went to Australia and started communities, and people held on to those traditions for years. And I think a lot of people in Scotland don't necessarily understand that those communities of people continued their traditions throughout the generations. And it's been part of my learning process as well from coming here and understanding that.
Yeah.
And I think probably that education is something that a lot of people in Scotland need to hear.
The one thing that just kind of popped into my head, do you think it's a bit of potentially either feeling guilty or kind of projecting a specific guilt that, you know, and I may get in trouble for saying this, but if for people in Scotland, like, you know, I don't wear a kilt, you shouldn't be allowed to wear one because you're not Scottish, even though I am not wearing one. Yeah,
it could be a part of that. I think it's that. I think there's also people who will feel, and this is something we say in Scotland quite a lot, we have the cringe to be involved with Scottishness.
Right.
And there's a lot of people in Scotland who have that. And part of it is, and I need to be very careful about how I word this, right? So
we'll edit it out if you don't like it.
Yeah, but no, but this is truth, right? There will be people who make fun of Scottish people in a way, and usually this will come during like kind of sport games like football, soccer, for example. Especially, you know, it might even come from people south of the border in England, for example. I don't think it's always designed to be nasty. You know, sometimes it's just fun, right? It's a bit banter, as we call it. But I think there's definitely people in Scotland that throughout the ages of hearing that, they have something in the back of their mind. It's like almost like a self-doubt, self-cringe about this Scottish picture that people have outside of the world. And so the people who feel like that often don't really want to be associated with that kind of tartan Jimmy image.
Yeah, cookie cutter, tartan tin, or tartan tin. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when, and this is when it gets really deep. All right, when we were in primary school, when I was in primary school, the Scottish accent, which is not an accent, it's actually Scots dialect, which is, for all intents and purposes,
its
a
own language. Yep.
Was taught out of us at primary school in Scotland. We were told by parents, not through any fault of their own, just through them wanting us to be better in life. And we were taught by teachers that we should not speak like that. We should speak proper English. And so that kind of self-cringe is something that's deeply ingrained and is taught into us from a very early age. Certainly my generation in the 90s and 80s, we were taught that that was a bad way to speak. You will never progress in life. You'll never get a job if you speak like that. Now, there is a movement nowadays where people are trying to bring Scots right to the forefront, remembering Robbie Burns and the way he spoke and the way he wrote, and make it a popular thing again. Because certainly when I was growing up in the 90s, it was something that it was looked down upon by a lot of people. And I think it goes back to this cringe, self-cringe that people have of this kind of Scottish image. And so I think when people see people from other places in the world with the kilt on come to Scotland, the people making those negative comments are often people thinking, that's not the image I want to be associated with. It makes them feel that cringe feeling.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I like getting into the psychological bit of it.
Yeah.
Nice.
And of course I might be totally off of this. This is based on my experiences and stuff that I've observed over the years. And when I'm talking about when we were young in school and teachers telling us not to speak like that, that's real. That happened to me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense though. It does make a lot of sense. So across your travels here, what is something that you have seen as an outsider that you think Americans should reflect on?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've already touched on this slightly, but it's really important for me to reinforce this. People seem divided down the middle here, and I think it is true to certain respects, but I've seen time and time again on people from both sides of different debates, from different backgrounds, from different ethnicities, that people are more similar than they realise in a lot of ways. And actually, people in a room on a one-to-one basis, and I've seen this happen, get along more and have a lot more in common than they would imagine. There's things that still divide them and still will make them have heated debates about, but there's definitely a lot more in common that people have and are able to discuss in an amicable, enjoyable way. And like I said, I've seen this time and time again. People are more similar than they realise.
I agree 100%. Mr. Shaun, thank you very much for coming out. I appreciate you. You're going to stick around for a little bit?
Yes, definitely.
Maybe do a little thing or two with us?
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Very nice. Until next time, boys and girls, Slàinte.
Slàinte.
Thanks for watching our interview with Shaun from Shaun Takes America. If you want to see other interviews that we've done, go check out these videos over here. And if podcasts are more your thing, did you know that USA Kilts has our own podcast channel? Go to your favorite podcatcher and search USA Kilts for this type of content and a lot more.